Welcome to the Birth Words podcast. This is episode number 21. In today's episode, I'll be collaborating with Hillary Melchiors from the Birth Geeks podcast.
You're listening to the Birth Words podcast. Utah-based birth doula and applied linguistics scholar Sarah Pixton digs into the language of pregnancy and birth to help expectant women claim their power as life-giving agents engaged in a praiseworthy work. This podcast aims to promote positive birth paradigms and is not intended as medical advice.
Welcome to today's episode of the Birth Words podcast. Before we get started, if you have listened to the Birth Words podcast before and you've liked what you've heard, will you please pause your podcast right now and head on over to the reviews section of your podcast app. Leave a review for the Birth Words podcast. Tell people what is helpful, what you love about it, and that will make it more possible for more people to hear the podcast, to find the podcast, and to have more intentional, reflective, and empowering language as they prepare for the experience of birth.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Hillary.
How are you?
I'm just fabulous. I'm so excited to be talking to you.
Ditto. I'm a big fan. I totally fangirled when I met you, by the way. Do you remember that?
Oh, I totally remember. It made my evening. I was so nervous. And then I was like, people know me and appreciate me. And it was very awesome. I really appreciated it.
Oh, anytime.
Okay, good. Let's set up another meeting time so you can fangirl again. Okay, so yeah, this is Hillary Melchiors, right?
Yeah.
I actually just listened to your podcast so that I would say it right. Just the little intro part. How does she say it? Okay. And Hillary is a podcast host too over at the Birth Geeks. Let me see if I can remember your slogan. I know it's something about upping but up is not the verb that you use. Something the professional something.
Upgrading the conversation.
Upgrading the conversation and something your professional moxie.
We're helping you renew your professional moxie.
Renew. There we go. Okay. Upgrading the conversation, helping you renew your professional moxie.
Yeah. So one of my daughters we had our kids record the tagline and she kept saying professional and we were laughing so hard. It was really cute. And this is Sarah Pixton. Sarah is a doula in Utah, but she's also a podcast host of Birth Words. So she's also a linguist, which I love as a language nerd myself.
Yeah.
So I love it.
One of my very favorite things that happened on social media was on Instagram a couple of weeks ago. Somebody tagged me and was like, there is literally a podcast for everything. If you're a word nerd and a birth geek, I just found your thing. And I was like, I'm so glad I filled that niche for you.
Right. And now we are here.
Yes.
Together. It's fantastic.
The birth geeks, the word nerds, the birthy, wordy, nerdy geeks. That was a really good introduction.
Yes.
I just have to comment one other thing, that your pin from the EBB conference, the I'm a Birth Geek pin that was in the swag bags or whatever. My daughter found it the other day and was like, what does a birth geek mean? And I was like, it just means you just know and love every single thing about it. And she was like, great, can I wear the pin? And then she had this kind of identity crisis throughout the rest of the next few hours as she was wearing it, where she was trying to defend her right to wear the pin, but not totally sure that she wanted to commit to everything that it represented. But she was like, I'm a birth geek because that means I love everything. Well, I don't know if I love everything about birth, but I really like the pin. So
yeah. So we're recording this on Halloween. It's going to be a little before we publish, but I wanted to tell you that my Birth Geek friends always have the best costumes. So one of my Birth Geek friends in Texas, she actually is dressed up as an IUD today.
Oh, wow. Can you put a picture of that in the show notes?
I should. Well, I have to ask her if it's okay.
Yes, with consent.
I mean, she's technically like the reproductive system because her hands have the ovaries on them, but very much the middle of her sweatshirt is a big ol' IUD. It's really fantastic.
All right.
So hi. So today we're going to be talking about, what are we talking about, Sarah?
We're talking about your top 3 tools to improve communication during pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period.
Yeah. Well, and as a doula, I really do try to get my clients to communicate with their care providers more effectively. I think that it's really important, especially because you have such a limited amount of time with them before the big day.
Yeah.
So you have to really be careful.
Yeah. And you're probably one of many, many clients that they have.
Right.
I mean, depending on circumstance, but especially if you're at an OB clinic, right?
Right.
So yeah, knowing how to have that effective communication, really important.
Absolutely. Well, and also, as a doula, making sure that I'm communicating well with my clients and in a way that they want me to. I think that that's also good.
Yeah. And then I think from your client's perspective, obviously they're communicating with you, they're communicating with their care provider, they're communicating with nurses in the hospital, they're communicating with friends and family members who have maybe just different opinions or thoughts or stories about pregnancy and birth that might be thrown at them at any moment with or without warning.
That sounds like you have personal experience there.
I have just, maybe not even, I mean, some personal experience certainly, but also just experience of listening to others' stories and experiences. So I think that the tips that we're going to touch on will help you navigate all of those situations, because I think that the way that we talk and interact with other people makes a big difference in our experiences.
Absolutely.
So
we were going to first talk, we were going to first talk about being intentional.
What does that mean to you, Sarah, to be intentional with your language?
That's a really good question. To me, it means a few things. One is being aware, like we've been talking about, of the effect of the words that you produce and also the discourse that you've been bathed in throughout your life, whichever ones they are. Just being, and now I'm kind of branching over into reflective. You can't really separate all of them, but we're trying. So intentional, just being aware that the way that I speak and the words that I choose to incorporate in my belief systems, in my feelings, in my experiences, make a big difference. So I'm going to make sure that the ones that I'm using are positive and confidence building, right?
Absolutely. Well, and as a doula, I feel like I'm combating a lot of the messages that my clients are getting from elsewhere. And so when I'm more intentional about my language with clients, I think that that's very helpful for them. Maybe I'm fooling myself that I'm not.
No, I don't think so at all. I'm totally going to jump on board with that and say, yeah. Because I think sometimes we're not intentional, but we're just using the lingo that is used without pausing to consider. Like in my Birthwords community Facebook group yesterday, we just had this big discussion about the word deliver or delivery, which some people have strong feelings about, some people not as much. Some people feel like, I don't mind it if the mom is saying, I delivered my baby, but I really mind it if the doctor is saying, I'm going to deliver you or deliver your baby, right? So we just had this big conversation about it. And one thing that just was brought to light is that we're really often not intentional, or again, reflective is the next thing we're going to talk about, but we just choose words because, well, that's the one that was in What to Expect When You're Expecting or whatever. And so I figured that's the word that we use.
Right. Well, I think also being intentional about even something really minor like pronouns, for example,
Yeah.
making sure that you're intentionally using inclusive language. That's very important to me. It's not for everybody, and that's okay. But I don't know if it's okay, but it's a thing. And I think that that's important as well. So,
yeah. And in addition, like, okay, we talked about pronouns and nouns, and this can be from like a gender neutral perspective or just from a perspective of being empowering, which we'll talk about as our third prong. Now I've revealed all of them. There's no more dramatic tension, except that Hillary's going to apparently surprise me with something down the road. So don't tune out now just because I've spilled all three beans. But, yeah, talking about just the words like client versus patient. What am I saying when I'm calling somebody a patient? What am I implying about their position and their abilities to make decisions and to, just be like an empowered participant?
Yes, you're making my medical anthropologist heart very happy right now.
Oh, good. Tell me more.
Well, that distinction actually between client and patient, I think, is really, it's a powerful one because of power distinctions, right?
Right.
Because a midwife they intentionally say client most of the time, at least the ones I work with. And that's intentional because they work with people, right? They don't work on people. If you're a surgeon, you're working on people.
Yes.
It's a little different. It's just a different perspective.
Oh, I was just getting excited about, like, we've talked about pronouns, nouns, now we're talking about prepositions. Like, it's also important, right? We're working with people, not on them. I love that distinction. And yeah, I love it. Okay. And my other, back to nouns, my preferred noun is birth giver because it's empowering and inclusive and just, like.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think that's fantastic. I think it's important.
I wanted, before we move on from intentional, I also wanted to talk just from the birth giver's side of things, being intentional in the way that you interact with your care provider. Like we talked about the importance of, making sure that you're having those conversations, but also being intentional about what you let in too.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Have your earmuffs. They filter everything, right?
Yeah. Or maybe there are things that have already been let in decades ago that are just like part of your identity as a birth giver that are not helpful. Like, what do you do with that? Well, maybe you need to intentionally work through them and figure out. And again, we're going into the reflective portion as well.
It's true.
You can't really separate it all out. But saying, like, where did this come from? Do I place value in that? Can I separate myself from it? And just like working through until you're left with an identity that is intentionally chosen and not just kind of what was thrust upon you.
I love it. It's almost a bridge from like being intentionally reflective.
There we go. Let's bridge. Let's go there.
Yeah, no, I think we should reflect more on our own language before we open our mouths.
Tell me more.
As we sit here and talk. No, I think that there's a lot of unconscious bias in things that we say and we don't realize it. And I think so reflecting on the reasons for your word choices I think that's also important.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, like just pausing and saying, oh, what just came out of my mouth? Or what am I about to open my mouth and say would be the best place to pause. But sometimes, like a random example that comes to mind, I, for a while, was a volunteer doula at a local hospital that has a volunteer doula program. And so I kind of had a couple of women that I'd talked to that were maybe interested in my support, but they were kind of not quite ready for it yet. And I was going to go take a lunch break. And I was just like telling the charge nurse or I don't remember who I was, the care coordinator, that I was going to go down to lunch, but there were these people that were maybe interested in my support. So here's my phone number if they get to a point where they're like, yeah, have her come call me back up. But I remember having this conversation with her and saying like, oh yeah, I have these 2 or 3 patients in rooms, blah, 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 blah. And then being like, wait, okay, A, I'm not even a care provider. Like, I'm a volunteer doula. B, like, I had purposefully avoided using that word. I wasn't quite as mindful about it at this point, but from that point where I was like, what just came out of my mouth, I've been really reflective about like, why did I say that? Where was it coming from? And part of it, I think, was like wanting to be savvy with the nurses and use their lingo and whatever. But if we're really reflecting, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, like, it sounds to me like you were mirroring, right? Like, no matter if she said one word to you at all, you know that she's a nurse. So you were almost like, you know, like, okay, now I'm talking to the nurse. So we're going to talk about patient.
Right. Yeah.
So from the other side of it, sorry, I'm just blah, 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 blah. I won't,
fine. No worries.
when I was pregnant with my first 2 babies, because they're twins, I was on hospital bed rest for 4 weeks. And that was totally something that I did during my time there, is that I started to mirror the nurses' lingo, because I wanted to be, you know, show them that I was smart and could like play their game and whatever. Like, not that they were trying to play games. They were taking good care of me. I was in early labor at 30 weeks and we didn't want that to happen. And in many, I mean, they came at 35, so we hung on for a while. But yeah, I kind of wanted to like use their lingo and very much became, I don't know, it was kind of this tricky place between, I was trying to empower myself as a patient, right? I was trying to be like, see, I'm the savvy patient, but I was very much assigning myself in the role of patient by just using all of this terminology that was very much placing me in that position. And in a lot of ways there were a lot of medical needs that were needing to be cared for. But then I think it really affected my birth experience when I was in labor, that I had been in this position as a patient using all the patient lingo and wasn't as intentional or thoughtful about the choices that I made during my labor. Anyway, interesting.
That is interesting. Well, I was just thinking, as a doula, I try very hard not to like overly use the medical language. So I feel like sometimes I'm like this cultural broker, not to be too anthropological, but
go for it.
You know, I can speak the medical language. I can, you know, give you the 2-minute rundown of everything that's happened with all the abbreviations. Like, I know how to do that, but I intentionally try not to do that with my clients.
Right. Because what position does that put them in? Like, then they're part of a medical system. And if they're trying to birth in a natural physiological system,
right,
whether that's at the hospital or not.
And I was going to tell you, I did have a client who made me much more reflective on my language than I ever really thought about before. I got the opportunity to serve a surrogate client.
Okay.
And that really made me much more reflective about how I spoke to her. And, you know, she was excited, but for much different reasons than a lot of the other people that I had the opportunity to serve. And it was a very interesting, it was very interesting it made me so reflective. It just made me think, oh, wait, no, that's not your baby. And I took a really great training online, actually, that made me think more about, you know, how I was going to speak to this person.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example.
Yeah.
Because then I bet going forward, you were more reflective about the language that you used with all your other clients, even if they weren't surrogate parents, because you realized that they are unique individuals, right? That should be spoken to in unique ways based on their...
Absolutely. I may or may not have revised my entire website. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I because I really enjoyed that process, and I mean that person in particular is really lovely, and I was like, man, I would love to do that again. I
Mhm.
should make sure that I, my website and everything that I publish, reflects that. Yeah, I want to be a part of that. So, and I know how to serve those people in a way that they would like to be. So that was a
Yeah.
really, I felt like it was on the job training a lot, um,
Yeah.
but really, really rewarding. So
That's awesome. Thanks for
yeah,
sharing. Cool.
anytime. So the last one is empowering.
Indeed.
How do you make sure that your language is empowering?
Well, we've talked about a couple of things, and obviously they're all intertwined, and it comes a lot from being reflective, saying, what am I doing when I refer to my client as a patient? Like, what is that implying about our relationship and her abilities to make decisions, to birth without assistance, et cetera, et cetera. So we've talked about that. We've talked about using intentionally empowering terminology like birth giver, like giving birth versus being delivered, right? I also think, as we're talking about reflection and the unique experiences and needs of each client that you serve, or if you are the one giving birth, as you're reflective, as you're considering, something that I do with my clients is have them just sit down and think about, okay, what are my feelings and beliefs about birth as a process? Okay, next step, what are my feelings and beliefs about myself as a birth giver? And then if a partner's there doing it, what are my partner's feelings? Well, the partner fills out, what are my feelings about my partner's abilities or whatever role as a birth giver? Okay, what about the roles of authority figures? Because that comes up. And what about, yes, right? Like, and different people are positioning themselves in different ways, and you're accepting or rejecting different authority figures throughout the whole process.
I am a big rule follower, and Robin makes fun of me for that. So,
Oh, yeah.
yes, there's a story I'll tell you later. Okay. Yeah, no, it's just we were driving, and I was like, "Oh, I can't do that. That's against the rules." And she was like, "It's okay. We were going somewhere. It's silly."
Yeah. Okay. But like that's okay. So, but let's go with that because we're talking about being reflective about various things that are going to come up in birth. And then I was going to say for the empowering part, then you work through, like we've talked about, the reflection. Where's this coming from? And you choose intentionally, again, looping back to being intentional, those things that are empowering. So if Hillary's giving birth and is a total rule follower,
I am.
It really matters who you see as an authority figure.
Right.
And what role you're going to let that authority figure play. Like if your care provider is, like, I don't want to do a negative stereotype, whatever, but if it's an obstetrician with a 50% cesarean rate and you are induced for some medical reason and you see your care provider as an ultimate authority figure who has proven through their practice that, they often choose those choices that lead towards the path of a cesarean, and you're just saying, okay, yes, yep, you're in charge. Then you have a 50% chance of having a cesarean birth, which obviously is not in alignment with like the actual physiological medical needs for a cesarean birth.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like, well, so again, to put on my anthropologist hat a little bit, I think that, we're taught in our culture very much to respect the medical profession. And I think that it's a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but respect versus like doing literally everything you're told and never questioning anything is a very, very different thing. And so they like respecting authority versus like bowing down to it. I think that you need to make that fine distinction.
Yeah, like you're saying, we are absolutely, I'm not, and I don't think Hillary is, advocating for, well, of course you're not, being disrespectful
Never.
to care providers, or like we are not saying like, go be a belligerent, like, no, I won't, whatever. Like that's not going to be a helpful way to communicate with your care provider.
Absolutely not.
A, B, it's not the respect that a human being deserves, especially one who is in a service-oriented profession, or and serving you. C, I don't know, all the things.
I feel like you should be empowered to be as respectful, like to be mirroring respect, right?
Yeah.
So if someone is being completely disrespectful and talking down to you, that's different than someone coming to have a conversation with you. Like, this is my opinion. These are the reasons why I'm recommending this. You know, that's a different story than walking in and saying, hey, you're going to have a cesarean because it's 4 p.m. and I have a tea time. Right. Like I have literally never heard that phrase uttered by a physician, for the record. Never.
Mutual respect. And I think that it goes along with being intentional about who you place in an authority as an authority figure. No matter how you position yourself, in some ways, whoever you choose as your care provider is going to have some level of authority at some point during your birth experience. And so you want there to be that level of mutual respect that, wow, my care provider respects and honors my authority as the one with the baby in my body, with the intuition to know the best choices for this circumstance, and with the power to and the ability to birth this baby. And not choosing somebody who doesn't respect your position as somebody bringing life into the world. Somebody, you know, a care provider that sees you more as a patient who's a passive recipient of care is not, you're not going to be able to have that mutual level of respect.
I really
going to be an empowering position for either person, but
I really loved how you incorporated all three resources into that.
Oh, well, there we go. Maybe that was my concluding.
I think that was fantastic. Sarah.
Yes, Hillary.
Are you ready for my silly question?
I'm ready for your silly question.
Have you seen the BFG or read the BFG?
I have read it. I have not seen it.
This is has inspired the question that I chose.
Okay.
So that's your warning.
I'm a little scared.
Would you rather burp bubbles or fart green fumes?
Burp bubbles. Bubbles are magical.
Agreed. How fun would it be to just be drinking soda all day and have little kids follow you around the zoo while you burped bubbles?
I mean, like, I hope that I could do it kind of politely so that we're just...
Oh, see, and I was imagining you like leading a parade while you're belching out bubbles.
Well, either way, I still would prefer the bubbles.
I would be so proud if I could burp bubbles. Green fumes, not so much. Be a little more embarrassing.
For sure.
I really appreciate you taking the time, Sarah. I know that we're in different time zones and you only let me fangirl once so far when we met in person. I really, really appreciate you taking the time, especially because I know that your podcast is typically much shorter than ours because we are chatty. Not that you're not chatty, but
I like to be chatty. I just restrict it sometimes.
I love it. No, I think that's fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thanks for chatting with me. I appreciate your perspectives and what are you laughing about?
No, I was like, oh, I have a perspective. No.
Yeah, your medical anthropology perspective. You pulled that hat out 2 or 3 times.
I did. I honestly, I never take it off. I got to interview one of my grad school professors for the podcast, and I think it was after we were finished, she was like, "You're doing such a great job using your PhD." And I was like, "Oh, that was maybe
That's
the best
awesome.
compliment I ever got.
Yeah.
So I just it never turns off. That's all right. Robin did get
I love it.
upset. Robin got upset because we were in Las Vegas together, and she said, "Do you ever turn the anthropologist off?" Like, no, not really. Sorry.
I like it. Keep it coming.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Hillary.
Did words play an important role in your birth experience? If you're interested in sharing your story on the podcast, go to www.birthwords.com. If you're liking what you hear on the podcast, please leave a review on your podcast app. For more resources about harnessing the power of words to benefit the birth experience, visit birthwords.com.